think that the Hindu Americans specifically voted vastly in favor of Trump, specifically because they felt alienated by Kamala Harris as she used her Hindu Indian identity only near Diwali, which was just like 1 week before the elections?
I think that there is an affinity for Trump among some members of the Indian American community. I've been on a number of broadcasts with Indians who support Trump. I think there are various things I like about him. I think if they identify closely with Modi, then they tend to like Trump. They like that kind of strong, assertive character. You know, Trump likes to project that image, but really, I thought Modi manipulated him during the first term. He knows how to play Trump, and he's going to do it again.
So, good morning, actually, and good afternoon, good evening, and even good night at other places in the world. This is Middle East Insights, and my name is Dr. Shubda Chaudhary. And today we are going to talk about Trump's presidency and what impact would it have on the US-India bilateral ties. And to explain the context, we have a very famous journalist and presidential historian, Ray Locker. He is the author of two books on Nixon. The first one being Nixon's Gamble, How a President's Own Secret Government Destroyed His Own Administration. The second one being Hague's Coup, How Richard Nixon's Closet Aide Forced Him from the Office. Apart from that, he is also, he was the Washington Enterprise editor of USA Today, directing all the White House correspondence in the first 2 years of Trump presidency. Before USA Today, he was an editor, reporter, columnist for Associated Press, Los Angeles Times, Tampa Tribune, and Montgomery Advertiser. So with this, sir, I would formally like to welcome you to our platform. And to everyone watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. There's going to be a very, very riveting conversation, I can assure you for that. So, sir, the first question is, you have covered in detail about Nixon. Do you think any kind of Watergate, the Robert Mueller's entire investigation was a certain kind of Watergate for Trump and Stormy
Well,
Daniels? But
I
do you
think
see?
uh, um, I think the more I look at Trump, the more I see, consider Nixon to be kind of benign by comparison. I mean, I remember I was a kid in the 70s. I was a teenager, and when Nixon resigned, and like it was a big, big deal. And studying Watergate and the things that led up to it, yeah, some of them were very serious. But Trump, every day he does a Watergate. Every day there is a thing that in a previous administration would have been a scandal for a long time. And with Trump, it lasts a couple hours. Um, and so we've become numb to the things he does. And I don't think that's a good sign. I look back at the Nixon administration, at things that I've discovered there, and some of them, were rather shocking. I mean,
Yeah.
he got in trouble for, his involvement in trying to cover up the break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate building. He didn't even know anything about that break-in beforehand. It was the cover-up afterwards. But there were some things that kind of got glossed over at the time that were a far bigger deal. And then people are, discovering them in the last 10 years or so. And I think primarily about, the relationship between East Pakistan, West Pakistan, India, 1970, 1971, the creation of Bangladesh. He basically turned a blind eye to what was going on in what was then East Pakistan. The refugee crisis in India, the war then. He didn't care about that because his priority was getting West Pakistan's help with the, overtures to China. So he didn't seem to really care about that. To me, that was a far bigger deal than what happened at Watergate. And so, you look at those things and they were serious. But when you compare them to the things that Trump has done and will do, they seem rather quaint.
That's actually very true. And when we compare, for example, historically, Nixon and Indira Gandhi had a very difficult relationship. Henry Kissinger had to really intervene at the time whenever they used to talk so that they don't start, scratching each other kind of. But on the other hand, Modi 3.0, Trump 2.0, it's more like a bonhomie, it's more like a bromance. So
Right.
when we talk about this relationship, my first question to you, sir, is that do you think that the Hindu Americans specifically voted vastly in favor of Trump, specifically because they felt alienated by Kamala Harris as she used her Hindu Indian identity only near Diwali, which was just like 1 week before the elections?
I think that there is an affinity for Trump among some members of the Indian American community. I've been on a number of broadcasts with Indians who support Trump. I think there are various things I like about him. I think if they identify closely with Modi, then they tend to like Trump. They like that kind of strong, assertive character. You know, Trump likes to project that image, but really, I thought Modi manipulated him during the first term. He knows how to play Trump, and he's going to do it again. And so, if you're India, you're probably going to get what you want out of Donald Trump the second term. I don't think that necessarily harms the U.S. interests. I think the United States and India have strong relationship and would be strong regardless of who's president. Just because India is a big country, the most populous nation in the world, it's growing. We have so many things in common. There's a huge Indian American diaspora here. People look favorably upon Indians in the United States. And that's been a big change over the last, 50 years when people just thought India was this poor country. But now Indian Americans are professional leaders. They're experts in medicine and law and science. And so they're respected here. And I think that bodes well for the U.S.-Indian relationship.
That brings me to my next question. I don't understand the concept of DOGE, Dodge, which Trump has selected Vivek Ramaswamy
Uh-huh.
and Elon Musk to head. What exactly is it?
I don't think it's really anything. It's not a government agency. It's an advisory commission that has no real governmental authority, but he'll give them authority to run around and do things, and no one's going to stop them. And so they're going to look at various aspects of government to see how they could run better or how they could do things that help the interests of Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. I mean, it has no real official sanction. So you're going to have these two outside consultants telling, the government, telling Trump what they want. And then it's up to him to decide whether he wants to do it or not, and whether he can persuade Congress to do that. And a lot of these government regulations, most of them are there for a reason. There has been a problem that's been identified in the past, and there's been some regulatory framework that's created to deal with it. And to just say, well, we don't need it anymore, I think it invites a lot of problems. That's not to say there aren't inefficiencies in government, because there are inefficiencies in every organization of people. And so there are ways that you could deal with it. I mean, I've done a lot of work on military spending, and there's tons of waste in there. People don't care. They just sign off on it. The contract administrators let the contractors do whatever they want, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So there needs to be a tightening up of ways that we run government. But that, I think, comes more on the managerial level than it does in terms of eliminating regulations.
That's actually because it's quite what's going viral right now that they both won't be paid for it. So everyone is
Yeah,
questioning what exactly the entire DOGE system is and what are their essential criteria. But at the same time, Trump also called India as a tariff abuser.
hmm
He said that India is a tariff abuser, a trade abuser, specifically, and then there were so many tariffs which were put on farm goods, Harley Davidson, motorcycles, and medical devices. Do you think that this kind of attitude, because he plans on putting his entire economic policy is on tariffs,
right.
60% on Mexico, 100% on Mexico, 60% on China, 10 to 20% on all of the other countries where India also figures out. So is he again going to, because what he used to do is that he used to tweet these kinds of lines just before having any kind of meeting with the Indian diplomats or the administrative officials as a transactional or negotiation tactic. So do you think that India is should be worried when it comes to the trade tariffs that Trump is proposing?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I think any country in the world should be worried about any interaction they have with Donald Trump. This is a guy who's told more than 30,000 lies in public during his first term as president. I mean, and that was documented by the Washington Post and other organizations. He's not to be trusted. He may tell you something, but you can't count on it. He's going to tweak with tariffs before a meeting to get you off balance. Um, he doesn't seem to understand what tariffs are. If you watch anything during the campaign, he thinks that's how, we're going to raise all this money. And yet the other countries are going to pay for that. No, we're going to pay for it. If we're importing something from India and he puts a tariff on it of whatever level, we're going to pay for it. So a company that's importing, goods from India and there's a 10% tariff, they're going to increase their prices by 10%. They're not going to eat the cost. It's going to get passed on to the consumer. India is not paying that. We're paying that. And when people understand that, they're shocked. They think that the crazy thing about Trump is so many people who support him think he knows everything. And what's troubling about that is he doesn't really know much of anything. People who worked for him, who were very accomplished in his first term, think that he's a complete idiot. When he had Rex Tillerson, the former chairman of ExxonMobil, as his first Secretary of State, Tillerson called him an effing moron. I mean, Tillerson, you may not have agreed with his policies, whatever they were. He was a man of accomplishment, and he rose to the top level of one of the world's biggest corporations. You don't get to that job by being an idiot. And yet people like him watch Trump and they're like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. That's what makes so much of this very troubling is people can manipulate him to get what they want if they play up to him on certain levels because he doesn't know better. He doesn't have the rigorous kind of work ethic that you see in a Narendra Modi or somebody else. He's not at work at 7 a.m. having meetings. He's upstairs in the residence until noon watching television. And so you can slip a lot of things past him, and his lack of understanding of things is going to cause a problem for anybody who deals with him.
That's actually true because I remember all those, there was a flurry of books that were about him published in his first term of presidency, and most of them were about that how the misuse of time, official governmental time that he has, be it eating a cheeseburger or whatever, and then casually just
Right.
lying down and not doing anything. And at the same time, how the entire press team was deliberately adding typos in the tweets so that they connect more with the common American masses. So he knows the PR very well. And that is one thing which is very similar in both Modi and Trump because they know they directly talk with the people. They don't believe in press conferences.
Yeah, I mean, what has bothered Americans for years with politicians is they are always editing what they say to whatever group of people they're talking to. They're thinking something, but they don't say it. And so what I think people appreciated about Trump, certainly the first time around, is he says anything that comes to his mind. He doesn't care if he offends anybody. And the more he does that and gets away with it, the more he continues to do it. And so people are like, oh, I like that he's strong. He's not afraid of things. But what are the actual effects of that? Well, he doesn't really accomplish much. When you look at his presidency, his biggest accomplishment was the 2017 tax cuts. I mean, he's got a Republican Congress. They love cutting taxes. But when you look at what he claimed that tax cut would do and at actual performance, they didn't work. They didn't increase economic growth. They increased the deficit. And so, even that didn't really accomplish what he wanted.
That is true. And also in 2019, sir, Trump revoked India's designation as beneficiary developing country under its generalized system of preferences. What did it actually mean in terms of trade
Well,
and in terms of...
I think he looks at India as not a developing country. He sees India as a big country with a strong prime minister, with a lot of industries that threaten him or the United States. So why should the United States give them a break as a developing country? Now, we all know that there's a lot about India that is still developing. And so, taking away that designation was not helpful. Trump is always worried or concerned or whatever you want to call it about another country taking advantage of the United States. And so he sees designations like that as somehow getting one over on the United States and we're being taken advantage of. And, we're the ones who need a special break in the world, which I find kind of ridiculous. I mean, the United States, regardless of what's happening to it, is still the world's largest economy. So much of the world's economic system is based on our currency. We're not disadvantaged, and he acts like we are disadvantaged. And, I think anybody around the world who looks at that goes, that doesn't make sense.
Well, it's very, like the immediate acknowledgement, because the Indian media was frantically covering the elections and you were also there. The point is that what I noticed was there was this very strong necessity to create that we are ready for Trump. We are not nervous about it. We were expecting it. It's good for India. That kind of rhetoric was being created. And I don't know what would be the future of it. But one very important thing that Trump actually did was that technology controls were lifted on India. India gained access to armed drone technology during his first tenure. India is now buying 31 Sea Guardian Predators. Even the system of Quad started. And Quad is going to have its meeting next year in 2025. So Trump gets to office in January, Quad takes place. So there might be chances that Trump comes to India again for the second time. So do you think that Trump's policy with India when it comes to defense, is he actually empowering India from that technology dumping background kind of rhetoric, or is it only transactional?
I think a lot of it's transactional. But in general, I think he and the people around him would like to see a strong India vis-a-vis China. I mean, China is always the big thing out there. And we all know the history of Chinese-Indian relations. So I think that's a part of it, to keep China off balance. Now, it seems like recent developments, things are getting better between China and India, so that's a good thing. But, if somebody in India said, hey, we need this when it comes to military technology, he's probably going to be inclined to give it to them. And with his appointment of Pete Hegseth as defense secretary, assuming he gets confirmed, I think you're looking at a more aggressive posture for the U.S. military across the board. And anything that is seen as aggressive and assertive, regardless, if it's with a U.S. ally, I think he'd look favorably toward that.
Yeah, and Trump has also picked Mike Waltz as the national security advisor, Marco Rubio as the Secretary of State. Both of them are China hawks.
Right. Um, and those are two of the best appointments he's made.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, Mike Waltz, congressman from Florida,
Yeah,
who I know a little bit,
yeah,
former Green Beret, uh, worked for Dick Cheney, entrepreneur. He's a smart guy. I mean, Democrats say you might disagree with him, but you can talk to him, you can have a conversation. And so that's helpful. He knows the material. Now, I mean, I think he did things to cozy up to Trump that weren't necessarily great, but that's the way it works. And same with Marco Rubio. We know that he's not really a Donald Trump fan,
yeah.
but he did lead the Senate Intelligence Committee, put out a very credible report about Russian interference in the 2016 elections with Senator Mark Warner, the Democrat from Virginia. So, he's able to work with people. And again, he's got an ideological point of view, which is fine, but he seems relatively competent. So I look at those two guys as kind of reassurance that things aren't going to totally go off the rails, but they may get in those meetings in the White House and realize this is not a tenable situation.
Yeah, I mean, like Marco Rubio was his competitor, but yes, Mike Waltz is the most sensible cabinet pick so far out of the lot as an outsider. The way he addresses the audience and the way he's talking about the content of his messages, specifically about US-India ties, that has gravity. So Mike Waltz is perhaps the most sensible choice out of everything. So now we turn to Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard, even coming from a Samoan ancestry and representing Hawaii, Tulsi Gabbard is the first Hindu because her mother adopted Hinduism, Vaishnavism. So Tulsi Gabbard was the first Hindu who got into the Congress. She took an oath on the Bhagavad Gita. Trump also met her a couple of times. Now, the question is that Tulsi Gabbard is being several times stereotyped as a Hindu nationalist. And she has very different positions with Trump when it comes to the attack on Qasem Soleimani or on Syria or whatever. She also is not at the same, because she is also a military veteran. So my point is that what role would Tulsi Gabbard be a better representative, which somehow Indians would project her to be, what they were not able to project Kamala Harris as?
I think there's a chance of that. But she has a record that's pretty, evident as being an apologist for Russia.
Yeah.
People think she's a Russian asset, and she's going to be in charge of the U.S. intelligence network. How does that end well? I mean, if you're an Indian diplomat or a spy chief, you might be able to get something out of her that you couldn't get out of somebody previously. But I don't know about that. I've talked on a number of shows about, the problems with Khalistanis and sharing intelligence with India and Canada and the United States. Maybe she's better on that than the current administration, but maybe not. I just think she's unreliable, and most of her former colleagues in Congress don't consider her very reliable. And so, it's hard to see how she's going to fit into running a major government bureaucracy. And I don't use bureaucracy as a negative term. That's what it is. It's a huge entity. It's corporation, an agency. And how is she going to do that when she doesn't have any experience? And so many of the things that she espouses are antithetical to the people in that community.
Yeah. So that brings me to the next question. Would Trump be very hard on India with India's close alliance with Russia?
Um, well, I think, he's a Russian apologist. So I think there may be some, tightening of that three-way relationship. I think he would try to use that to his advantage. If he's thinking along those lines, he may think Putin likes Modi. I like Modi. I like Putin. We all like each other. Let's do this,
Yeah,
instead of thinking maybe that's not a good idea. I know that there's a lot of complexity around that relationship. And,
yeah,
in terms of how Modi has navigated the Russia-Ukraine situation,
yes,
I would not want to be Ukraine in this situation now because I
yeah,
don't think that works to their advantage.
yeah,
And Ukraine is the victim here. Trump tries to make it look like Ukraine is the aggressor. It's not. And, this whole idea that somehow we're fomenting a war by helping Ukraine, and if we just stopped helping Ukraine, it wouldn't happen. I find that crazy. Ukraine was just sitting there. First, Putin took Crimea 10 years ago, and then he invaded Ukraine 2.5 years ago with no provocation. And Trump seems okay with that, and he's going to pressure Ukraine into doing something that's against its best interest after they were attacked and thousands of their people were killed. And I don't know how any country looks at that and says, "Oh, I feel reassured by Donald Trump."
and that's actually a lot of analysts from Ukraine were actually scared as the election
Yeah,
results came out. They were scared.
yeah, they should be. I
Yeah,
mean, this is not a good thing for them. And by the way, if he gives Russia what it wants in Ukraine, Russia's going to keep doing whatever it wants anywhere else. And there's nothing Trump can do to stop it. And so he thinks he's got this, great relationship and he's this geopolitical mastermind, but he's not. And, he's just bumbling his way along. And the people who actually know what's going on are scrambling around to try and deal with that.
yeah,
And, go back to what we started talking about Nixon.
yeah,
Nixon knew exactly what he was doing.
yeah,
And the thing with Kissinger is that, everybody had this image in the late 60s, early 70s that Kissinger was doing it all.
yeah,
And one of the things that I realized working on those two books is Kissinger was just doing what Nixon wanted. You know, Nixon was the architect. Kissinger was a draftsman drawing the lines on a piece of paper. And that this is the other way around. Trump is not the master architect of anything. He's just there doing whatever, and people are, kind of working around him trying to get their various things accomplished. And, that's a big difference from what happened more than 50 years ago with Nixon.
yeah. And also with Nixon, one thing that he was super paranoid, used to bug his own Oval Office and others. But
Right.
after he resigned, he wrote a lot of books and he went on world tours. I don't know if Trump can manage doing that.
Well, I mean, Trump didn't write a book after his first term,
Yeah,
and I don't think he's capable of writing a book now. And by the way, I don't think he wrote any of his previous books. I mean, the guy who wrote Trump, The Art of the Deal, Tony Schwartz, said he wrote the whole thing, and Trump kind of popped in and out, and he regretted writing the book because it helped make Trump, into some kind of alleged business mastermind. Um, so yeah, I mean, Nixon Nixon was a very complicated guy, but a person of substance
yeah.
and very, very smart. And that's one of the reasons why he's been so fascinating to journalists and historians, since his presidency.
And that is like when I was reading about, Nixon and Watergate and all the entire developments that took around at that point of time, also the Vietnam War and the other ramifications on India, like
Mhm.
creation of Bangladesh, the relationship specifically between Indira Gandhi and Nixon. One thing which really impressed me was the dedication that he had, like the super paranoia that he had of self-critiquing himself and others. And that kind of filtering was is important when you are the most
Mhm.
powerful man in US.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the role of Bob Woodward and others when it came to, creating this entire, revealing the Watergate scandal. So now coming back to Trump, Trump in his first presidency put a lot of pressure on India to cut imports from Iran, oil imports. Now, yesterday, day before, Elon Musk met the Iranian ambassador to UN. Elon Musk is trying to, mitigate the crisis between US and Iran. Do you think that Trump coming back will again, because what India started doing was importing oil from Russia, being a laundry state, exporting it. That itself is all correct, but then the hypocrisy of the sanctions, then, because then the European countries were taking oil from India, which is actually Russian oil. So the point here is that what happens to Iran? What do you think? Because Iran has a new president. The head of the regime, Khamenei, is old, retiring for the past 10 years, God knows how long. But do you think that Elon Musk will be able to craft some kind of deal?
I don't think he'll craft it on his own. I know that people are concerned about him acting in a quasi-governmental role right now. That doesn't really bother me because that happens all the time. You know, people reach out to different countries that we don't have relationships with. You know, we know that they're doing it. And so if Musk was really doing that as a positive force, that would be fine. But there's always a whiff of self-interest in anything he does. You know, is he doing it for himself or is he doing it for the United States? Or is it kind of a combination of both? I don't know. You know, I think it was a mistake to get rid of the Iran nuclear deal that Trump dumped. Iran has only gotten emboldened since then. Its nuclear abilities are stronger. And, you know, that's not a good thing. But he helped make that happen. And, I mean, he should be looking to make things better with Iran if these threats are real. You know, the Iranians want to kill him, and which would be a disaster for the world. Any American wants Donald Trump to live to a ripe old age and not have anything happen to him, because if anything did happen to him, if he was assassinated, it would lead to just all sorts of craziness. His supporters would go nuts. There would be a lot of violence. And if the Iranians were identified as being part of it, then woe on Iran, because they're going to, you know, reap the consequences. And they would deserve to do it. I mean, have it happen to them. So I think reducing tensions with Iran would be a good thing. I don't feel a lot of confidence in that, but I would like to see it happen.
Let's see what Musk does, though I think there are a couple, like, there was this yesterday or today, yesterday, there was this speech of Trump at Mar-a-Lago where I didn't understand if he hated Elon Musk or if he was loving him, staying all the time there with him. It was completely, like, I didn't know the humor. At the same time, what I can predict is that they're going to have a fight. Because they're both egomaniacs. They're going to have a fight sooner or later.
I mean, does Trump want to be playing second fiddle to the richest man in the world? I don't think so. And by the way, Musk knows exactly who he's dealing with. He knows he can manipulate this guy and get what he wants. And eventually, the people around Trump are going to start talking about that more and more. There's a very finite number of hardcore Trump loyalists. And then around them, you get a number of opportunists who are looking for what's in it for them. And those people, after a while, are going to start talking. And that's what you found during the first Trump administration, is these revelations about him, they didn't come from Democrats. It's not like Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi went to the White House and got all this inside scoop and went and told people. No, it came from his own people. I mean, that's what I found when, during the first 2 years of the Trump administration, is we were getting stuff from Trump's own people
Yeah.
all the time, because they would go to a meeting, they would hear something crazy, and they would run out of the meeting and talk to the first reporter they could find, because you had to talk to somebody about it. And I don't know if you've ever worked in an organization for a crazy boss. I think many of us have. That's all you talk about. You talk about your crazy boss. It intrudes into your life at home. You're thinking about what's happening with this guy. And that's what it was like with Trump. People couldn't believe what they were hearing. Oh, let's buy Greenland. What? And there's always a cycle with these Trump revelations. The story comes out, it sounds too crazy. Some unknown person, unnamed person in the administration denies that it's true. Then, like a day later, Trump says it is true. And then the pro-Trump media goes on a campaign to debate whether or not it's a good thing, and they try to justify it. That happens every time with him. And so, and that's going to happen again. And people who think it's not going to happen are delusional.
Really, the best part of the Daily Show with Trevor Noah, that was the best part that helped me to make Trump palatable for myself.
Yeah.
Otherwise it was chronic anxiety watching Trump. But Trevor Noah helped in making it completely, humorous. I miss him. And the Daily Show is not the same. But at the same time, let's see how it goes after January 20th. Now, coming to Canada, right now, I wouldn't like to name, but a lot of those in the echelons of power in India believe that Canada has a prime minister who is underage and is not mature enough to handle the country. Canada, the prime minister is much more obsessed with, when he was in India, he was much more obsessed with his own attire, beauty attire, which he changed every second, than actually diplomacy. But things between Canada and India are not very well. The Biden administration has played a pivotal role. The Five Eyes have played a pivotal role under the cover, kind of, trying to control the situation. What do you think would be Trump's role in it?
I think he'll be more supportive of India than, say, Biden has been, within reason. I mean, and I've talked about this a lot with folks in India, is when you're dealing with somebody like the Khalistanis, and you have, and there's always exile communities in countries like the United States that are active. People come here because they have the freedom to be that way, because they don't feel that freedom back home. There's a difference between saying things and actually doing something that is a criminal act. And the FBI needs to have what's called a criminal predicate to really investigate somebody. They got to know that you're doing more than saying things. And so we can't assume that they're not doing anything. When you hear somebody in the United States or Canada, particularly United States, saying something that India doesn't like, you can't assume that we're not doing anything about it. They're probably being surveilled in some way. But we can't just arrest them,
Yeah.
Oh, they're saying something, like Modi must go. That's not against the law here. Now, if you're saying Modi must go, and by the way, I'm meeting with you to buy a bunch of weapons to bring back to India to kill him, or something like that, that's against the law and that's actionable. I think if Trump has an FBI director who is one of his pawns, that maybe you'll see more along those lines, something more aggressive. And I think back to the 90s when I worked in Florida. We had a guy who was a tenured university professor who was also a member of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorist organization.
Oh,
and
wow.
the FBI was tapping his phones.
Yeah.
And we wrote about him saying, this guy's a terrorist. And there were people like, oh, you're just picking on him. You're an Islamophobe. You're a Zionist. No, he's actually a terrorist. And And it took a long time and a change in administrations to turn the intelligence gathering part of what the FBI was doing into a criminal prosecution. And he eventually did get prosecuted, and then it was acquitted, and there was a mistrial, and then they tried him again on the charges there was a mistrial of, and he eventually pleaded guilty and left the country. So I'm familiar with this situation. You know, we were like, how is this guy doing this? Well, they couldn't prove that he was doing anything more than just talking. And that's the situation, I think, with a lot of these Khalistani activists, is they're just talking. And I don't know what the government knows. I don't know what the United States and India, what kind of information they're sharing. I assume it's a lot, but I just don't know about it.
No, that's actually, it's very interesting also, because I don't know if India has not designated Hamas, for example, as a terrorist organization. I don't know about PIJ, but has US designated as a terrorist organization? The Palestinian Islamic Jihad organization.
Oh yeah, and Hamas too. Yeah. And so it was just that was a very interesting story to be working on, and frustrating in a lot of ways. But yeah, they were a sanctioned terrorist operation, and people were like, some of them got snowed by the argument that, oh, there's academic freedom involved, we can't do anything. And
but then if there's evidence of foul play, then there's evidence of foul play. It doesn't matter what member organization you're part of.
Yeah.
I mean, it's universal.
Yes. It's just, and when these things get in front of a jury, you just don't know what they're going to do. You think, oh, it's obvious, right? But it's not always obvious. A jury goes in its own direction. And in the case of this guy in Florida, Sami Al-Arian, you know, I saw these transcripts of conversations that he was involved in that came from intelligence wiretaps. And you're like, he's obviously doing it, but the jury disagreed. And so, yeah, these cases are frustrating. And if you're an Indian official and you see this happening, you're like, somebody needs to do something about it. And I know that they're talking to people, and I know they will continue to talk to people in the United States to bring forth whatever evidence they have.
No, yeah, that also, because, you know, even in intelligence, there are so many layers upon layers. So the intelligence gathering might be done by the lower clerical levels, and then it might not be taken seriously by even the higher clerical levels of their own intelligence community. And then there are different organizations of intelligence which are at each other's mudslinging and with the foreign ministry. So all of that does create. So eventually the person who's actually tapping and getting the information is often rendered obsolete in the higher chain of commands when it comes. So that I agree with, that I completely agree with. Now, coming to my next question, sir, Trump is saying that he's going to deport 11 million workers who are illegally there but employed. He's also saying that India is the largest community that applied for the H-1B visa.
Mm-hmm.
He calls it unfair. What would be the let's leave the diplomatic line or the administrative line that the president and the prime minister, but for a common Indian American or an Indian staying in US on an H-1B visa, how do you think would the job prospect be for them under MAGA?
I think at the heart of MAGA is racism. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a white-oriented movement to the extent that they identify as such. They may not consider themselves racist because they may know and like people of different races and backgrounds, but essentially it's a racist entity, in my view. Okay. And so Indians on an H-1B visa in the United States are somehow taking jobs away from Americans. Well, now let's put aside the fact that there aren't that many Americans who are capable of doing those jobs. We don't have a surplus of white American kids who are good at coding, or there are a lot, but there's not as many. And so Indians on H-1B visas aren't coming here to take jobs away from Americans. They're performing vital services to the U.S. economy. You know, we're better off with these people being here, okay? But a lot of the MAGA crowd doesn't see it that way. And they see them as interlopers and job takers and foreigners who are changing the composition of the country.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, they don't like it. Now, these people who are doing the complaining aren't capable of doing those jobs, or that immigrants are taking jobs that go, they wouldn't do those jobs anyway. Do you think some guy from Guatemala who's picking fruit in California, do you think there's a white guy in California who really wants to do that job? Absolutely not, or he'd be doing it. And so the idea that we're going to root out 11 million people who may be here illegally and kick them out and send them back to their wherever they came from or wherever we think they came from, and their U.S. born children and their U.S. born wives or husbands is heartless, and it will create tremendous economic upheaval. So you got tariffs and you got deportations, taking away people who don't get paid a lot to do vital jobs. Then you're going to have a huge inflationary effect, which economists have already identified, and a lot of voters just don't seem to believe.
It's actually because it doesn't really make sense, especially as far as I know. So, for example, if an Indian man goes and gets an H-1B visa, if the wife comes along, she cannot work on the spousal benefit. She needs to, if she has that kind of privilege and social capital, she can apply for a work visa, which will again take 3 to 4 months to come. Sometimes she get a license, like if she's a doctor or not, but then sometimes she might not get the license.
Right.
Most of the women who have husbands who are on H-1B visa end up sacrificing their careers. They don't get jobs over there. They take a different route. Maybe they enroll in a university, get a education over there, masters and all of that, and then get into it. But again, 3 years or 2 years of your life goes behind.
Right.
So that is something which is really difficult to understand, and how it goes and the system of it, especially how will he just be, because it reminds me of the Windrush scandal in UK. They were not able to send people back to Jamaica. Jamaica never took them.
Right.
So how does it make sense? Like 11 million people, it's too much.
It'll cost untold billions of dollars. I've seen estimates up to $88 billion. $88 billion. You're going to have people, military, border patrol, police roaming around neighborhoods, ripping people out of their homes, showing up at workplaces. If you look different, you're victimized. Well, let me put it this way. If I'm an Irish illegal immigrant and they're here, they come here, they overstay their visas, they get jobs, I'm a lot more secure than I'm an Indian illegal immigrant or a Hispanic illegal or undocumented immigrant, because I look like a white person. And so if you speak Spanish and you're congregating somewhere, you're automatically going to be targeted. So like if you go to a lot of American cities and you go to like a home supply store, like a Home Depot or a Lowe's, there are usually a bunch of Latino men waiting out in the parking lot to be hired as day laborers. And when I lived in Southern California, I went there and did that. I hired some guys for a day to work on a project I was doing. And, I paid them in cash. And a lot of people do that. Those guys are going to be the first on the list to be targeted. In my old neighborhood in Maryland, there was a U-Haul store. I mean, you familiar with U-Haul? It's a rental truck.
Yeah.
And so people go and they rent a U-Haul truck to do a moving project at home. There were always a bunch of Latino guys waiting out there for the same kind of work, day labor. Those people are going to be the first to be targeted. Then you have all of these Latino men who work for construction companies, landscaping companies, they're going to be targeted. So if this thing plays out the way that Trump and his people are talking, good luck having your lawn cut, in some of these cities, because these guys are going to be gone, or having your roof repaired or work done on your house. I mean, we have a guy from El Salvador who I assume is a U.S. citizen. He's a great guy. He has a great crew, and they do work on our home, and we pay them the legitimate way. But those guys got to be nervous, right?
Yeah.
And so, and the people who are doing the rounding up aren't very subtle about it.
That is. And do you think that something like George Floyd will happen again, taking into the kind of the rampant white supremacy that is going to get back?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a person of color in the United States. I don't know what that's like, but I know that those people are usually looked at askance by law enforcement. And they are by a lot of people. If you're a young black male, people are going to be looking at you differently. They're going to assume that you're a criminal, whether you are or not. And, a guy like George Floyd, yeah, if he's doing something that seems suspicious, somebody's going to call the cops on him. And then you're going to have a confrontation. It's like that kid in Aurora, Colorado a few years ago. I think his last name was McLean. The guy had he was like autistic, or he was just acting weird, or perceived to be weird at night, walking in a neighborhood, a black kid, white neighborhood. Somebody called the police. The police came up on him, started asking him a bunch of questions. He wasn't able to process what they were asking him. And he ended up in the hospital and died because of what they were doing to him with the restraints. And I think people who are inclined to do those things in law enforcement, who have some kind of racist tinge to them, are going to feel emboldened by Trump.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened with George Floyd.
Yeah. And especially the entire, the George Floyd incident was very integral, but there's so much of division within the American society. I'm not saying that Indian society is very unified, but there's so much on various issues, be it on the Palestinian issue, be it on the Black civil rights movement, be it on the women's abortion rights movement, so many things. The rights of immigrants, children being caged, and many other, various kinds of rhetorics are floating around.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be a very difficult place to live in.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a member of a certain group of people, yeah. I mean, if you're a person of color, an immigrant, a woman seeking abortion access, it's not going to be great. I mean, if you have no conscience, you'll be okay. I mean, I don't feel like the Trump crowd is going to go target me. I'm a 64-year-old white guy. I'm not going to be, I'm not on their list to be persecuted, but it doesn't mean I have to like what's happening, even if it's not going to happen to me. It makes life here just not as good as it should be, because you have people who are making policies who don't know what they're doing, don't understand the nuances, are motivated by greed or racism or dislike of another group of people, and that creates a very toxic environment.
Yeah. So the first question is asked by our volunteer Anurag, and he's saying that in one of his statements, Trump had called Pakistan's ex-Prime Minister Imran Khan as a dear friend and spoke about trying to aid him in getting out of the current quandary that he's in. During his earlier presidency, Trump had offered to mediate India and Pakistan over Kashmir back then. In view of the above statements, how would Trump 2.0 affect India-Pakistan dynamics?
I mean, it's not comforting to think of Trump trying to mediate the India-Pakistan situation.
Yeah.
He doesn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
Imran Khan probably flattered him in some way or showed up at his country club, or did something, and Trump's like, oh, he's a good guy. And so I can do this. He thinks he's this master negotiator, and he's not. He gets rolled all the time. And so if I'm, the prime minister of Pakistan or Narendra Modi, I don't want Trump anywhere near that unless I think I can get something from him.
Yeah.
But I would just say thank you very much for your offer. I think I'm going to try it on my own for a while, and just let it pass.
Yeah.
There are some people in this upcoming administration who may be capable of dealing with it, but it's not him. And by the way, he'd get bored by it after a couple hours, Oh, all this talk, I'm going to go watch myself on TV.
I mean, yes, that is, and that's why also I'm very skeptical of him with the Israel-Palestine issue. Any kind of conflict, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, India, Pakistan, any kind of Armenia, Azerbaijan, any kind of conflict.
Yeah.
What's happening in Sudan, what's happening in many other. It's scary to have him as the final sign where the buck stops.
I mean, I'm very self-conscious about this because I don't want to always be Mr. Negative, right? But he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's profoundly ignorant. And every once in a while, he hits on something that might be the right thing to do, but that's only by luck. It's like spinning the roulette wheel, whether the ball is going to land on the right solution. The rest of it is him blustering and talking and, oh, I'm going to bring in these people. Has it ever happened? I mean, he did all that stuff with North Korea. What's happened? Nothing. Nothing happened with North Korea. He goes to the DMZ and meets with Kim Jong-un, which is just mind-blowing, right? But what happened? North Korea is still doing the same thing. They're not any better. They're not going to change. He didn't make them change. And meanwhile, you have a major U.S. ally in South Korea sitting there watching all this happen and going, oh my God, we're at risk with this guy. Oh, well, here's another wrinkle. Pete Hegseth, the possible defense secretary, if he's confirmed, talked about using a nuke on North Korea in 2017 to the horror of South Korea. Because if you've been there, like I have to the DMZ, Seoul's a half-hour drive. You think that fallout's just going to stay in North Korea? It's just the profound bluster and ignorance of this crowd is mind-blowing. And it shouldn't make anybody feel good, Even if you're Indian, oh, Trump likes Modi. So what? He's just a destabilizing force.
It's just even with Iran, that Iran's nuclear site should be attacked, and I was like, yes, like let all of us get right that. So
Yeah.
that it doesn't make sense, but all of that. And when there were speculations that Iran is going to attack Israel, Iran is going to attack Israel, and as the moment Trump tweeted that Iran is going to attack, expected today, Monday, I was like, now Iran is not going to attack. No.
Yeah.
That is the certain kind of, what do you say, the cognitive dissonance that, and also a certain kind of Stockholm syndrome that we develop in the process of consuming the, not, I don't want to use the word, the consuming the various different tangents of Trump's character or behavior in a normalized way.
Yeah.
So that also is not healthy. And
No,
yes, sir.
I mean, Trump has a way of making every criticism of him like, oh, you just don't like me. And his supporters are like, oh, you're only saying this because you just don't like Trump. It's not true. It's their bad ideas. And he's promoting bad ideas. And he's a profoundly unqualified person to be president. And, we saw what happened when you have a guy like that as president with COVID-19. You know, his supporters like to act like the pandemic was something that just happened. It was foisted on the United States and everything was great until then. And then COVID ruined it. He made COVID worse. He made it worse. He
Bring the
ignored it.
detergent.
Yeah. He lied about it. He promoted these quack cures. He disregarded science. He stepped on people who tried to do the right kind of public health policies to mitigate the problems. He's on tape lying about it with the Bob Woodward book that came out.
Yeah.
And so he made it worse. He ignored plans on how to deal with a pandemic when he became president. He inherited these plans and totally disregarded them. And the people who worked with him on pandemic response all know what happened. And so that's what you get with Donald Trump when things get bad. That's the guy who's in charge, and he's incapable of dealing with it. And it's going to happen again. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to happen again. And do you think with this gang of people he has in his potential cabinet, Tulsi Gabbard, Hegseth, John Ratcliffe, the new CIA director.
Yeah.
Do you think Mike Huckabee, those guys in a room together trying to figure out what to do? It's insane. Do you think that if those guys had the intelligence about Osama bin Laden in 2011, that they could be in a room and pull off what happened with bin Laden? No. I mean, they would have, if they knew where he was, they probably would have taken, the least surgical option. They probably would have left a giant crater in Abbottabad and, killed a bunch of innocent people because they're so ham-fisted in what they do that there's just no subtlety there. And that's troubling,
It is. It definitely is. And coming to our last question for today, sir, Gaurang is asking this question, is that both Trump and Modi in their own ways have become the party or their respective face of the parties. Now, what happens after their end?
Well, I think it's very hard to have Trumpism without Trump. Some people will try. I don't think that they have kind of the cult of personality to be able to do that. I certainly don't think J.D. Vance does. I mean, it's crazy that guy's a heartbeat away from the presidency.
Exactly.
He's totally willing to sell out what he believes, if anybody knows what he believes, for influence and power. That's what the crazy thing is, they know better.
Yeah.
You know because they've told you they know better. And they're trying to pretend that they never said that. So I don't know who has the following that Trump has. You see some people who want to, but I don't see a galvanizing force on the Republican side so far who's able to do that, unless, one of Trump's kids, like Donald Trump Jr., thinks that he can do that.
Wow.
And he's a totally different story. I don't think we have enough time to go into that, but they might try to be some kind of dynastic, family.
Yeah,
scary as that may be.
It is. Someone tweeted, like half of my life has gone just in not voting Trump from 2016 to 2024. It's like actually so many years have passed by.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like it, but it's going to hit us again very hard on 20th of January.
I was working then, and I can tell you those 2 years when I was doing that were the craziest 2 years of my career. I would wake up in the morning, I would check Twitter, 6 a.m, he's already tweeting. I would get with reporters who I knew were working, who were awake that early in the morning, and we would have to do a story based on his tweet. And usually it turned out to be a total red herring, not anything of substance, but he's the president of the United States. You can't ignore him. And that was every day. And the days would stretch into the evening as somebody would break a story about him that we would then have to chase and try to confirm. And it was nonstop. And I've told this story to a bunch of people. I was in my office one day, sitting at my desk, talking to two reporters about what was going on. And I had to go take a bathroom break. I went to the bathroom, came back 2 minutes later, and he had fired a cabinet official in those 2 minutes. And we had to scramble to write a story to get online immediately to deal with that. I mean, that's how unpredictable it was. And one day, at the end of the day, one of my reporters was leaving, at the end of the day, and said to another reporter, "Have a great weekend." And the other person said, "It's Tuesday." It just seems like it's been a whole week, Every reporter I knew in Washington had this kind of shell-shocked look from covering the Trump White House. They were just wiped out. And it's going to be even worse because he has no guardrails now.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I remember. I do remember. It's like any time, and the amount of frequency, thank God he was banned from Twitter.
Yeah.
It was too much. I don't know what it was. And I don't think so he actually tweeted. It was his team that was tweeting, but the frequency of it, oh my God, it was too much.
Yeah.
And I had no notifications, and I was like, my phone used to like buzz or dug, 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 dug. Like, how much can you tweet in one day?
Yeah. You have a job.
Yes.
You have a job. I mean, can you imagine being in like a company boardroom and your CEO is like on his phone tweeting it during a meeting? I mean, that's what it was like. What are you doing? Are you paying attention? Somebody could be telling you that there's some global threat and you're on Twitter.
Telling about the global threat that I just, heard about it. Right now, it's so smooth.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, people complain about their kids being on their phones all the time. He's on their phones all the time. He's like the world's biggest teenager, It's troubling.
It's actually troubling, it's the other way around. He takes away all our energy and grows with it.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, sir, for today. And
thanks for having me.
We are all very thankful for the privilege of your time. And I hope everyone who's watching it on YouTube also enjoyed it. It was a very one-to-one, open, like heart-to-heart conversation. There's no politics behind it. Thank you.